Good evening and welcome to tonight's SEPTA Forward Bus Revolution Transit Talk for a summer 2022 update. A few quick notes. First off, the meeting is being recorded and will be posted to the project website along with the previous transit talks that are already available up there. Secondly, if you'd like to use subtitles, there is a live transcription feature that you can select at the bottom of the screen. Let me just enable that right now. There you go. Okay. And finally, I want to remind you that this is a webinar, so your cameras and microphones are muted. If you have a question or a comment, you can enter it in the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible following the presentation. All right, next slide. First on tonight's agenda, we'll have a few introductory questions, which we'll get to you in a minute. Then we'll begin the main presentation with Harley Cooper of SEPTA and Bethany Whitaker from the Bus Revolution team. We'll recap findings from this past spring and preview what you can expect for the next phase of design and round of engagement in the fall. Then we'll take questions again. If you have a question, please anytime type it in the Q&A feature and we'll try to get to as many questions as possible following the presentation. So right now I'm going to launch a poll and there's 3 questions in the poll and you'll be able to see the answers in just a second. So here we go. The first question is, which part of the SEPTA region are you most familiar with? You might recognize these areas from our community conversations if you attended any of those. The second question is this the first time you've participated in a Bus Revolution event? If we see that 100% of you say no, then maybe we can skip some of the stuff you might have already seen before in the presentation. And question 3, if you have participated in an event, how did you participate? The virtual transit talk, such as this one, did you just visit the website, maybe check out the story map, the network options, a community conversation, a pop-up at a bus stop or station, project bus event, survey, or others? So I see we have about 85 attendees right now, and about 50 of you have responded to the poll. So maybe I'll give you another 10 seconds, see if we can get up to about at least 80% of you. 5, 4, 3, 2. Okay, I'll end the poll. All right, let's see. Okay, so a good mix of the city, not a little less so in the counties, but most of you from Center City. So that's interesting. Is this the first time you've participated in a Bus Revolution event? 3/4, this is not your first event, but 1/4, this is. Okay, so that's very helpful for us to know. And if you have, how did you participate? Most of you have participated in previous transit talks, about 2/3. All right, interesting. 44% have visited the website. Okay, about 1/4 have attended a community conversation. All right. So that's the welcomes for tonight. With that, I'm going to introduce Harley Cooper of SEPTA. So Harley.
Hi, thank you. Thanks, Henry. Good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for sharing your evening with SEPTA. We're really looking forward to discussing the findings from this round of engagement, providing an update on where we are with the Bus Revolution. Again, my name is Harley Cooper. I'm here tonight from SEPTA's Service Planning Department. And I want to start out by giving a little bit of a foundation, a background on the project, since I'm actually a little surprised that there's some folks who haven't been part of this project yet. So I'm going to spend a little bit more time on that background because I know it's new for a few folks. So if you want to go ahead to the next. So as many of you know, the Bus Revolution is part of SEPTA's strategic plan, SEPTA Forward. And there are 3 projects that are part of SEPTA Forward, Project Metro, which some folks know as our wayfinding project, and then Reimagining Regional Rail, as well as the Bus Revolution. All 3 of these projects work together to create what we like to call one lifestyle transit network. So that's the idea of one transit network that works for everybody in our region. So really getting away from those 9 to 5 commutes and serving all trips throughout the day and also throughout the week. So some of you may have heard us refer to the bus revolution as a blank slate approach. So that really just means we are looking at all of the bus routes in our system, and we're looking for ways to make the network work together as a whole, not just improving individual routes, but really looking at the whole system from scratch. So it's looking at all of the bus routes, where they go, their levels of service, where the transfers are occurring. We're also recommending a new service structure, creating a new hierarchy of routes. So this idea that different types of routes serve different transit markets. And as part of that, we're introducing a new service type for SEPTA, which is microtransit, which is an on-demand, demand responsive service. And then lastly, we're identifying capital improvements. So that's really looking at where we have large concentrations of ridership and service on specific roadways and corridors, and looking for ways to work with the city and then with some counties to create transit priority infrastructure to really help speed up the buses through the roadway. You can go to the next slide. And we have 3 goals that are part of the bus revolution. They are to put the rider first, to increase access to opportunity, and to build trust with reliable service. We go ahead to the next slide. And this is our project approach. It's the timeline that we've been working through. So in 2021, we really focused on existing conditions and understanding what our network does today. And in 2022, we have focused on developing what our new proposed bus network will be. And we've done that by creating 2 different networks. We call them Network Option 1, Network Option 2. Hopefully you have seen them. That's what we're here to report back on tonight, is that we shared them with the public throughout the summer through an extensive public engagement process. We received feedback from our riders, our customers, our stakeholders. And moving forward, we are starting to process the feedback that we received and are incorporating that into one preferred network. And we are going to take that back to the public in the fall and do another round of engagement to get feedback on that one single preferred network. Once we have a finalized network, that's what we will begin to implement in fall of 2023. And you can go ahead to the next slide. And with that, I am going to hand this over to Bethany Whitaker, who's leading our project team. She's going to provide an update on where we are in the project, summarize the outreach that we did, what we learned from everyone, and how we're incorporating that feedback into the preferred network. And we did set aside quite a bit of our agenda tonight for a discussion. So I just want to make sure everyone knows you can put your questions in the chat, and Henry will facilitate that conversation at the end of Bethany's presentation. So
excellent. Thank you, Harley. So first of all, thank you all for calling in tonight. I know on a summer evening, it can be, there's definitely other things to do. So we all really appreciate that you've made some time to talk about SEPTA Forward Bus Revolution with us. And like Harley mentioned, I do have a presentation. It will take probably around 15-20 minutes or so. So we should have plenty of time to hear from you and answer some questions. So it did sound like there were a handful of people that this might be the first time they have heard about the bus revolution. And so I'll take just a quick second to talk about where we are, and then spend most of the time talking about what we found and what our next steps are. So as Harley said, the bus revolution, we call it a bus network redesign, which means that we are pretty much putting everything on the table, changing routes, looking at new ways to serve markets, thinking about how frequently routes, how long they operate, all kinds of things. And so what we did in the spring of 2022 was we shared 2 network options. We had just kind of simple names for them, Network Option 1 and Network Option 2. And what they did was offer different ways that we could reorganize and restructure the bus service. Network Option 1 was really focused on making the service as frequent as possible, as simple as possible, and as a result, it had fewer routes. And then Network Option 2 had a different balance of frequency. It still tried to create more frequent and a simplified service network, but it added more routes back in to provide a little bit more accessibility. So you can see in this table, Network Option 1 had 93 routes, about half of which were classified as frequent, which in our terms meant that a bus would come every 15 minutes or more, or sooner than that. And then in network option 2, there was about 109 routes. About a third of those would be classified as frequent. And then that compares to SEPTA's existing network, which has 125 routes and about 32 of which are frequent. Another thing that we looked at or we're exploring is this idea of microtransit, and which is an on-demand flexible transit service that operates a little bit like Uber and Lyft, where you can book a ride on your phone. In network option 1, there's 13 zones that are microtransit zones, and in network option 2, we had 9. SEPTA currently does not operate this kind of service. Another thing, and I'll mention this a couple times, this exercise is a cost-neutral exercise, so we have the same number of resources today that we're going to have for our network that we're planning and designing. So we're always checking. We want to make sure that what we're showing to the public and what we're coming up with falls within the existing resources. And we're also balancing things both regionally and for the bus network overall. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a couple of minutes. So with these 2 network options, some of you may have seen these maps. This is network option 1. You can see a lot of red routes, which means the 10-minute service. The purple is the 15-minute service, and then the green teal color is 30-minute service. So one of the things that's kind of unique and interesting about this network option is that all the service is relatively frequent. Every bus route comes at least every 30 minutes. And then these gray areas are the microtransit zones. So the thinking with this network option is that it has fewer routes, it's more frequent, it's simple. We're not recommending in this one operating a fixed route bus unless we feel like there's enough riders for it to come every 30 minutes. Also, the service is similar 7 days a week. So we also have a lot of frequency on Saturdays and Sundays. That's one of the ways that it's a key way that it's different from SEPTA's existing bus network. And then we also have network option 2, and you'll notice some changes right away, which are these yellow or gold colored routes. These are the hourly services. And so, as I mentioned, we have more routes here. You see fewer red lines, which are the 10-minute services, but still a lot of purple lines, a lot of buses that come every 15 minutes, a lot of buses that come every 30 minutes, fewer microtransit zones, similar access to the bus service as SEPTA has today, but just configured slightly differently. So we shared these 2 network options with folks in a variety of ways. We had a social media strategy where we used Facebook and Instagram, and transit app where we pushed out, come to one of our events, go to the website, take a look at the maps. We had some pop-ups at bus stops. We had a project bus where we went to community events, farmers markets, street fairs, things like that. And we also had a series of virtual community conversations where we set up conversations about specific service areas. So we could dive in a little bit more about where the routes were moved to, or how they were changing, or where there were new services. So we could really try to facilitate some conversations. And one of the fun things that we did, which hopefully some of you have seen, is we did take one of SEPTA's buses. We wrapped it with the Bus Revolution logo. So you might have seen it in service. And then this is the bus that went to the street fairs and to some of the farmers markets and things like that. You can see people set up some maps, and they had a game that you could play. And there was always a handful of staff around to talk about the project and what it was offering, and do some education, encourage people to learn a little bit more. So we we had good participation. We're happy with the numbers. With the pop-up events and the project bus, we had almost 3,000 people participating. We had a lot of people that visited the Bus Revolution website. And then we had this activity or this information called a story map, where people could go in, look at maps, look at the maps, zoom in, zoom out, provide comments, look at how the network changed between the 2 options. We had about 10,000 visits to that, although they're not necessarily unique visits, so probably fewer people than that. We did a survey. We had almost 1,800 people complete the survey. There were more people who started it but didn't finish it. And then we had around 250 people who participated in the community conversations. So we had a lot of participation. But when we looked back at our findings and where we heard from folks, we did some debriefing, and we thought, yes, we did. in many ways, we're happy with the amount of people that we reached, but we also felt like at the end of the day, we need to do a little bit more. So some of the lessons that we learned was when we showed people the 2 network options, while people found that interesting, it was also challenging. And especially with some of the events at the pop-ups and with the project bus, people didn't necessarily have the time to really take a look at the maps, walk through things, consider how it would affect them, provide some opinions. Some people did, but other people, they took a card and hopefully they went to the website, but we're not sure. We didn't always hear back from them. We also got a lot of comments, especially from the city of Philadelphia. So that was great, really valuable. We felt like we got enough feedback so that we could prepare this draft network, but we did want to hear a little bit more, especially about microtransit and especially from people in the suburbs. So what we are proposing to do, and Harley did mention this a little bit, is that in the fall, we're going to show a single draft of proposed changes and get some feedback about that and really focus on telling people as many people as possible, attract attention, let people know that we have some ideas about changing the bus routes and encouraging feedback. And so we're hoping that with just showing one network option, it will be a simpler exercise and easier for people to tell us what they like and what they don't like. But it will still be a draft, and then we'll have a final version of it in the winter of 2023. So with that in mind, we're still at this same point in the project where we're evaluating the scenarios and creating a draft recommendation. And we will be moving forward with the final recommendation in the fall and still starting to work forward with implementation. So this is definitely a project that's going to happen. We're gearing up to make some changes, and hearing from you and getting your feedback is really essential to this process. So what I wanted to do is just tell you a little bit about what we did here in the spring and how that's influencing our decisions. So as I mentioned, we had all kinds of places where people told us what they thought and gave us insights, the pop-ups, the bus, the community conversations, some focus groups, staff conversations, surveys. And I'm going to walk you through some of that information. And as I do that, I just want to I'm going to show the survey results first. And I just want to make it super clear that the surveys were only one piece of information that we are taking into account as we prepare this draft network. There's sort of an easy source of information to talk about because it's quantitative. We can produce some nice graphs and tell you about the insights, where as a lot of the comments, we've been summarizing those and tabulating those, but it's a little bit more difficult for us to summarize that. I have a couple of slides, but even though we're talking about the survey a lot, I just want to make it really clear that that is only one piece of information that we're taking into consideration as we prepare the draft network. So with that said, I did mention we got about 1,700, 1,800 survey responses. About half came through the story map, which was on the website. People went to the website, they clicked through, looked at the maps, looked at the data, and then they took the survey. We also pushed out a survey link through the transit app, and about 800, about half, just slightly less than half of the survey responses are from those folks. So some of the things that were great about the survey sample was almost everybody who took the survey had taken the bus since April 2020, and about half had taken the SEPTA bus the day they took the survey. So we know we're reaching a lot of the riders. That's really great. One of the things that was a little bit that we're taking into consideration as we evaluate the survey, and we're really happy and appreciative of everybody who filled it out. Most of the responses were in the city of Philadelphia. There were responses throughout the service area, but a high concentration in the city of Philadelphia. We did make some special efforts to push it out to people who lived outside of the city, and we had some success with that. But again, the findings are really concentrated in the city of Philadelphia. Of course, bus service is also concentrated there. So some of that we would expect, but we were hoping for a few more responses from places outside of the city. And likewise, for the demographics, we did get got a lot of responses, but we took the data that we got and we did weight it by race so that we could give a little bit of a better reflect the results would better reflect the existing SEPTA bus ridership. We did a household survey in the fall, and we worked with SEPTA's customer service research team to help us weight the sample and make sure that we recompose the answers so that they reflected the bus ridership overall. So some of the questions that we asked was, were how easy were the two network options to understand. And so we asked people about network option 1, and there was slightly over 60% said network option 1 was easy or very easy, and slightly fewer than that felt that network option 2 was easy or very easy to understand. We also asked people if they thought what their thoughts were about each of the network options in terms of being easy to use. And about half in both cases said that they felt like network option 1 would be easy to use, and then slightly less than that for network option 2. In both cases, there was a large group that was neutral, and most people felt like it would be easy or neutral to understand. So that was interesting for us. We also asked people which network option they liked better. In general, most people said that they liked network option 1 better. It was not a majority of folks. It was about 45%. But generally speaking, it was the preferred option regardless of age, race, household income, access to car, or gender. And then I think one of the things that has been really insightful for the project team is there was a lot of people who said that they were unsure which one they liked, and also that they didn't like either one. So we took those answers into consideration as well. When we asked people why they liked one option over another, for network option 1, the overwhelming response was the frequency of service and the fact that the buses were going to come more often, they wouldn't have to wait as long. And for the folks that liked network option 2, the things that they liked were that they wouldn't have to walk as far, and they also felt like they had more choices and options. So again, those are good insights and information for us as we go forward and start to think about how to design this draft network. We also asked people about microtransit, and one of the questions that we asked was if the fare was the same, did they think that they would use it? Most people said yes. A lot of people said that they were unsure, and then there was about 20% or so said that they wouldn't use it. And of the people that said yes, many are in lower income households, and they include both men and women. They included people who had and didn't have access to a car. It included a diversity of races as well as ages. And then one of the things that was interesting for us and also quite useful was a majority of the responses from the suburbs said that they were open to microtransit. And if you remember those maps, most of the microtransit zones are in the suburban locations. So seeing that folks who live there are open to using microtransit was useful information. So I have a couple of slides that just kind of quickly go over what we heard from some of the other events. And for the pop-ups, which is where we were at the transit centers, and we had some maps and boards and some giveaway items and some postcards, we got about 150 rider comments. Most of those riders preferred network option 1. And again, it was a pretty consistent theme of they liked the simplicity, they liked the frequency, and there was a sense that those two factors really made it a better network. For people who liked network option 2, there was, similar to what the survey told us. People liked the option of more routes. They liked not having to walk further. And then the comments, we also heard quite a bit about concern about older adults and people with disabilities and making sure that they still had access to the transit system in a way that was going to benefit them. We also had at the Project Bus, which I showed you the picture. This was from an exercise where people could vote. They were given 3 chips and they could put them into one of 6 cups and tell us what their priorities were. Those cups, this is a graph of that. So people liked simple and frequent. They liked the same kind of service all day. They also liked more routes and shorter walks. And they also, those conversations, really reiterated that desire for more frequency, service that ran later in the night. And then we also got a lot of comments about specific services and things that people were looking for and they wanted from any network changes. So when we kind of put it all together, we felt that the data told us, the information told us that the people who like network option 1, they're really interested in simplicity, the frequency, and the weekend service. And people who like network option 2, they wanted more choices, they wanted shorter walks. And as I just mentioned, there was a lot of folks that were really concerned about older adults and people with disabilities. And the people who were unsure, so they wanted both, more routes and more frequency, or their preferences really depended on when they were traveling. And the thing, in some cases, several people just said that they wanted the bus to come on time. So we put all these comments together, and we are talking about, we got a lot of comments about specific bus routes. I didn't really show those in this presentation because it's very detailed information, but we are combing through all of those and looking at each route that people commented on. We think for sure that we'll be adding back some routes and some connections. We heard a lot about making sure that there are direct connections to Center City. We got a lot of comments about our decisions or the draft network options, the way that they routed buses on Chestnut, Walnut, and Market. So we're going to be re-looking at that. There was a lot of suggestions about how some of the network options had a lot of transfers in there, and that they were, asked us to reconsider those. This sense of retaining service frequency during the midday and in the weekend days was something that we heard a lot about. Also, reconsidering the evening hours and making sure that the service was available a little bit later. So all of that feedback is what we're taking into account and listening to you all, what you told us was important to you, and using that as we design the draft network. I just want to also point out that this project is really focused on the bus services, so like where the routes go, how often they come, what hours that they operate. But when we talk to people, we heard a lot about safety and security, cleanliness of the SEPTA facilities, and operator shortages. Many of these comments are, they're very related to what we're doing, and we heard so much about them that it is something that we're also SEPTA's talking about this a lot amongst themselves. They're undertaking a lot of strategies to address safety and security. I heard that there was an unfortunate and really sad incident that happened today. So I just want to make sure that everybody knows that is top of mind. If there are questions about that, we can try to talk about some of those. So in terms of the bus revolution and moving into the next steps, what we will be doing is, as I mentioned, preparing this draft bus network. And it will still need to be cost neutral. It needs to be cost neutral overall for the SEPTA bus network overall. And then we are also required to keep the service levels the same by county. So we won't take service from City of Philadelphia, put it into Bucks County, and we won't take service from Bucks County and put it into Philadelphia County. So it will stay cost neutral, and that is our constraints. That's what we are working with. But as we prepare this draft bus network, because we only have one and we have a little bit more time before we go back out and show it to you, we're going to add more detail. So we're going to have more specificity about the hours that of operation by day, the frequency by time of day, the spacing for bus stops. So we're not going to tell you, or we're not going to have information yet about where the bus stops are going to be, but we're going to say things like, if we have a 10-minute bus service, this is what we would expect the bus stops to be spaced. We'll also start to talk about capital investments in places where we need to put new transit centers or more sophisticated waiting areas because bus routes are converging, or we're expecting people to make transfers. So we'll start to provide some of that detail and bring you more information than what we shared last time, because we'll only have that one scenario. So we'll be able to define it in a little bit more, and we're really hoping that it's a little bit easier for you to provide some feedback and insights into. And then lastly, what we're doing at this moment is getting really organized for our fall engagement. So we're finalizing that engagement strategy. We haven't finalized our network yet, but as soon as we do that, we're going to start preparing the materials. We're going to, have a lot of maps, have some trip planning tools. We're crafting our message. We want to make sure that people know about the bus revolution. We want to create a sense of urgency because this is happening. This is something that we want to advance. We don't want people to be surprised about it. So we want to make sure that people pay attention and that we have the right kinds of events. We have enough events so that people can really get involved and tell us what they think. So with that, I'm going to pause, and I think we're going to go to some Q&A.
Thanks, Bethany. We have half an hour here for Q&A. First, I'm going to launch a quick poll, just a one question poll. What's the best way to reach you and your community? Just thinking ahead to the next round of outreach. I think while we answer this polling question, there is a question in the Q&A that it relates just directly to the last couple of slides you were talking about, Bethany, with what's next. So maybe we can just address this one really quickly.
Sure.
The website says there will be 2 more rounds of outreach. Will there be 1 or 2 rounds of engagement? Because the last slide stated another round of engagement is needed. I think that's the lesson learned slide. Yep.
Yeah, for sure. And I'm sorry that wasn't clear, and I could totally see why it wasn't clear. But initially, our plan had been to do one more round of engagement. So we had planned to go out into the fall, and then in early in 2023 move into implementation. But what we have decided to do instead is have two rounds of engagement, one in the fall, another one in the winter, and then in the spring of 2023 start to move into engagement with more urgency. Okay. So hopefully that's clearer.
All right, I'm going to end the poll now, share the results. I see most of you, 6 to 8%. The best way is virtual meetings, transit talks. I think there's a little sampling bias in there, considering this is a transit talk, but that's quite all right. All right, so now we'll move into the Q&A. First question, what is being done to increase the reliability of the bus network and the accuracy of bus tracking? It's very hard to rely on buses to commute to work when they will sometimes just not show up at all, show up very early or late, or disappear from the SEPTA app in the middle of their route. Obviously, SEPTA can't control traffic, but being able to reliably know where a bus is on its route would be useful when these things happen.
That is a good question. And I think, Harley, I'll go ahead and start, and then you can jump in unless you want to go first.
Okay, sure. No, go ahead.
So I just want to point out from the beginning, this is, I think, our 4th or 5th transit talk, but we started the bus revolution in the spring of 2021. And we started to ask people about, what they cared about with SEPTA, and reliability has been the top concern pretty much throughout the entire time. And so that is definitely part of the network design. And by simplifying the bus network, by focusing on frequency, we're trying to increase the reliability of service. Also, some of the early conversations we've had about capital investments, they're also designed to make the service more predictable and more reliable, because we know how important it is for you to be able to predict your trips so that you don't, have to arrive a half an hour early so you're not 10 minutes late, and then just really rely on that service. So it's a big focus of the project. The service designs are really oriented around that.
Yeah, I'm just going to add a little bit from the SEPTA side to that there is a known issue, because what you're asking about here is the real-time arrival information, either in the SEPTA app or if you use Google Maps or Transit app. That's how I interpreted that. And there is a known issue with some of the modems on our buses, and our IT department, our vehicle engineering and maintenance department, they're working on it. They realize how important it is to get the customer facing information out, and that is what impacts the customer experience, just as much as the actual service delivery. And so they're working very hard to fix that. I do want to just point out that a couple of years ago, SEPTA invested in a software product that helps us to improve the accuracy of our predictions. And that's something that you see today in our that you see in the predictions that are out on the SEPTA app. And so we've seen a great improvement once we had that data feed, but the hardware is the issue right now, and we're working through that. So I just wanted to acknowledge it and let you know that we're aware and working on it. But thank you for bringing it up, because I think it impacts everyone.
All right, next question. Does SEPTA plan to convert their fleet to electric buses to be more environmentally friendly?
Yeah, I wanted to take that one too. So our Office of Innovation has been doing a lot of work on the zero emission buses, and all of that information is online. And Henry, is there a way for me to provide the URL in the chat, or should I just I can point people to it. It's the planning.septa.org is our planning website. And under projects, you'll see the zero emission bus project page. And that has all of our current studies. It has project status. There's a lot of information up there. And I would just encourage everyone to go and to look at the ZEB, the bus master plan, for more information. But absolutely, we are.
All right. And I just typed that website into the question, so it should be in the chat there, in the Q&A. Next question. As an outer county resident rider, I've struggled quite a bit with getting to a bus stop and getting between routes within a reasonable time. So I'm concerned with cutting service that is already sparse, especially weekends and later nights. Has something been discussed to address this? Bethany?
Yeah, I would love to start that answer, and then I think Harley's probably going to have a couple of things to say as well. So I think one of the interesting things about the two network options is this use of microtransit, which is not necessarily a door-to-door, but kind of corner-to-corner service that you can schedule on demand. So in the way that the network in some of the outer areas works right now is there's a handful of buses that maybe come every 30 minutes or every hour. And in some cases, we're looking at, can microtransit do a better job of that? So it would pick you up closer to your home. It would drop you off closer to your destination. You would have to schedule it, but you could do a same day schedule. And we would set the service so that it would pick you up within, say, 30 minutes. And so that's a real option that we're exploring and want to get some more feedback on. So I would encourage you to pay attention to some of this information that comes out about that and take a look at it and see if that would work or make your situation easier. And then I don't know, Harley, if you have anything to add for that.
This is one, I would want to know more information about the particular area. I wonder if there's a way to sort of follow up on this. I guess the person who wrote that, I would encourage you to write into the SEPTA Bus Revolution, the email, because I think we'd like to get a little bit more information. Yeah, that's all I would add.
And I don't know if this was answered in there, but another question about microtransit and the outer suburbs. So microtransit route requires scheduled pickups. What time will the service be available?
So my understanding of that question is that there's two questions related to time. One is the hours that it's available. And then the other one is how soon how long would you have to wait for the bus to pick you up? And so our initial proposals are that microtransit would work very similar to the way that we schedule and provide the fixed route bus service. So if the fixed route bus service is available from 6 a.m. till 9 p.m., that's how long the microtransit would be available. The Bus Revolution draft network options, we're trying to provide more service on the weekend. So there would be more service that would be available on Saturday and Sunday as compared to today, for example. And then the other idea is how long you would have to wait, or what's the maximum wait time for it to be picked up. And again, we'd like to try to tie that to the way that the existing network do it at least as frequently as the existing network. So if a bus comes every hour, it could be, our best case scenario is that the microtransit would pick you up in 30 minutes. That's what we're trying to do. That's the level of service that we're shooting for, is that the microtransit vehicles would come and pick you up at your, or drop you off in about 30 minutes.
Okay. Has SEPTA and the municipalities started any work to define new layover locations, bus lanes, signaling in preparation for some guaranteed bus rev changes? This person had heard that many of the layover locations are set and really can't be modified in Philadelphia, limiting the extent to which the network can be a real clean slate design.
So that is a big part of this next step that we're taking, because we had two options and we were, we didn't tie any of them down too tightly. We made sure that they would work within the available resources, but we didn't really, we paid attention to the capital needs, but this time we're really rolling up our sleeves and we're saying, okay, here's a draft network. Here's where the buses would lay over. Here's where people would transfer. Is there a facility there? Yes or no? Does a facility need to be upgraded? What kind of investment would be required, so that we do have a really good sense of, is this achievable? Is it realistic? Is it something that we can do?
Yeah, I would just add to it, we're starting to talk about that in terms of the service design, but it's something we work on regularly, day to day, outside of Bus Revolution, and making sure that we do have end of line locations, because it's a limiting factor in service design. It's a limiting factor as we talk about ramping up frequency on some of these routes. So we have been coordinating as these issues come up in our day to day, and sort of talking about what bus revolution, what a particular end of line is going to look like under bus revolution. And we are thinking longer term. And those are our conversations with our real estate group, our capital budgets group, with our buildings and bridges, and sort of thinking longer term, because capital projects they have such a long lead time. So, but it's a great point. I'm glad that was raised.
Okay. How much did you rely on survey data to create the updated bus network?
So it was one of several inputs we are still in the process of creating that network, that updated network. So survey data was a big part of that, but as were all the comments that we received at the pop-ups that we received through that people gave through the website or put in the maps, or talk to us at any one of the events. So, and also the bus driver the focus groups and the meetings with SEPTA staff, all the information was weighed in, taken into consideration. So there wasn't like one thing that drove us more than the other.
Okay, just one more question while we're on the subject of the survey. Your survey looked like it didn't represent SEPTA riders. What are you doing to make it more accurate or representative?
So, I'm sorry if I didn't make that clear. So one of the things that we did do is we weighted the sample. We adjusted the data so that we made sure that that it would more carefully reflect the SEPTA riders. We know that 95% of the people who filled out the surveys had taken a SEPTA bus, but we know that a lot of the riders, they tended to, we used race as our variable to adjust the data so that it would be more reflective.
All right. Isn't it true that the only ways to increase frequency on a particular route are to reduce the number of stops and ensure that the bus lanes are clear?
I would say it's one of the ways, but it's not the only way, because you could reduce a lot of stops, but if you didn't put more buses on the road, you wouldn't necessarily have more frequency. You might have buses that operated faster, but you wouldn't have increased frequency. So when we're talking about frequency, we're talking about the number of buses that we send, and our plan to make to send a bus every 10 minutes or every 15 minutes. How often it stops is a related issue, but when at this time we're talking about frequency, we're talking about how often we send out the buses.
All right. Can you elaborate on the methodology that determined the options were cost neutral? How would each option be able to expand if additional funds became available or savings realized?
So our methodology for doing the cost neutral is that we did a service planning. We estimated the distance and the speed of the buses and how long it took for them to complete a route. And we call those revenue vehicle hours. We add up all the revenue vehicle hours that are associated with our network design. We compare them to how many revenue vehicle hours that SEPTA is currently operating. So it's fairly simple math. It is at the level that we did it, it's a little bit rough because we use some average speeds based on the part of town that the buses were traveling. And so there's refinement that we'll have to do, but we feel like we're in the ballpark. And then was there two questions? Oh, one was about expanding. And yes, we definitely could. We have ideas for expanding if more resources were available. And as we move forward with the draft network, those will become clearer and more obvious.
Okay. Can SEPTA place ads on buses and bus stops in order to inform people about the proposed changes and about opportunities to provide feedback?
So do you want to take that, Harley?
Sure. So we can put more information on the vehicles. We currently have, we call them car cards. They're the advertise, like when you look up the advertisements that are along the top rim of the bus. And we do have, I believe every single bus in our fleet has a card for the bus revolution, but as we're talking about our fall engagement, we are talking about how we can increase visibility, both on the vehicles at transfer locations, at transportation centers, at bus loops, and how we can really, make the project more visible for day-to-day riders.
and I think changing our message a little bit to be a little bit more urgent, because we originally designed those car cards to be evergreen, right? So that they would be relevant throughout the whole time. And I think maybe people stopped noticing them. And so we want to be a little bit more forceful, a little bit more urgent with our message.
Okay. Are you taking into consideration well-known drug corners when you are asking people to walk further to a bus stop? In some parts of the city, it's not safe to walk further.
Yeah, so I think that's one of the things I mentioned briefly, that safety and security was one of the comments, one of the most frequent comments that we heard in nearly every conversation that we had. So we know that it's really important. And we are looking at our bus routes and where we're asking people to transfer and comparing that comparing that a little bit with some of the data that we have about crime, but also talking really to stakeholders to make sure that we're not doing something that's going to put people in jeopardy, knowingly put people in jeopardy.
Yeah, I just want to add to that a little bit. We've had a lot of conversations because that is what we hear every community conversation that we have. And so we've been talking about the data sets that we have within SEPTA, how we can really increase the dialogue that we have with our transit police, use the data sets that they collect and that the city of Philadelphia that they have, so we can start to take some of those factors into account as we get closer to one preferred network. It's more feasible to do with one network than with two, but we are starting to drill down.
All right. Will the implementation be done route by route or all at once?
That is a really good question. I think we haven't decided that yet, and it depends on how dramatic the changes are. And I think it also depends on a few things about operator availability and funding and a few other things. But it's a really good question. It's one that we've been talking about and trying to think through.
Okay. When do you expect to be able to use contactless cards or Apple Pay on buses? I think this will help increase usage of the new network if visitors can easily board.
Oh, so I know that SEPTA is working on a mobile fare payment pilot, but I don't have the specifics on that, and I don't want to misspeak. So we've been having conversations, but I think that's at this point it's a pilot.
All right. Is the plan still to have consistent timing between buses through the whole day? I'm not sure if this is a frequency of buses or if it's maybe the time frame that the proposed networks are shown in. But
so I think my interpretation of what that question is about is one of the things that we talked about both with Network Option 1 and Network Option 2 is that we would create a more consistent schedule of services. And right now, SEPTA service is heavily oriented around the peak, which means there's more frequent bus service during the traditional commute time. So between, say, 6 o'clock in the morning, 9 o'clock at night in the morning, and then 4 to 6 in the afternoon. And what the Network Options 1 and 2 recommend or proposed was that we would have the same level of frequency throughout the day, and that we would also have similar levels of frequency on Saturdays and Sundays. And that, we're still in the process of designing this draft network, but that is one of the things that we want to carry forward because it's one of the things that we got a lot of positive feedback on.
All right. When you say service levels need to be the same for each county, does the service levels account for city routes that are being cut back from the suburbs? For example, the 14 is being cut back to Neshaminy Mall. So will there be more service hours added to the other suburban routes in Lower Bucks to account for the loss of service?
That is a good question. As part of the planning exercise, what we are planning for is that the number of bus hours in Bucks County, our yardstick was spring of 2022. We will have the same number of bus hours in Bucks County when we implement. So whether or not those, we run how we provide that service, whether it's fixed route service, whether it's a lot of microtransit, that those hours and that investment will be the same. So hopefully that answers the question. I don't know if you have any other ideas, Harley, but that's the best I can think of answering that.
I'm going to add that with the, with Bucks County, I think that the trade-off there is the microtransit is that provides the additional level of service that you would see in that truncated Route 14 today. And we did that because, we have service on these arterial roadways in Bucks County, but what we hear from our riders is that they want to make these, not everyone's trying to go to the city or make these longer trips in Bucks County. They're making these shorter trips and they're connecting to regional rail and sort of point to point within the county. And we felt like Bucks County served that a little bit better than having additional arterial bus routes in Bucks County. And so that sort of gets back to like serving different transit markets with different transit like types of routes and that the hierarchy of routes. And so overall it evens out, but it's sort of serving the different transit needs within the county. So I don't know if that answers that, but.
All right. Will there be any new routes under this plan? I know we have talked about making certain existing routes more frequent and cutting some underutilized routes, but will there also be new routes?
Absolutely. There are new routes in both network options, and I fully expect that there will be new routes in the draft network that we're developing.
Okay. All right. I heard that the trolley routes will be lettered through SEPTA Metro. If SEPTA Metro is approved, what will happen with the existing bus routes that are lettered like the G and the L? Will they be changed into numbered routes?
We haven't, that's sort of part of the implementation plan. I don't think we're far enough along to address the nomenclature for the bus routes at this point.
Right. But that is on the table. If we should change the bus route numbers, should we reduce, eliminate the letters? Those are things that we are thinking about. I think it's just further down the schedule.
Okay. It seems like a lot of interested city residents whose routes will be affected did not vote because it was unclear how their particular route would be affected, despite reading the high-level information about the two plan options. How will SEPTA revisit the polls for this issue once that information is better made available? Bethany?
Yeah, no, for sure. I think that is one of the reasons why we want to add this additional step in there, because there was a lot of information you could look, but it was too much to look at one option, a second option, and then also the existing network. So we do feel like when we go back with this draft network, we compare it with the existing network, people will really be able to see what it means to them. And if they will need to walk to a new bus stop, if it doesn't change things, how it changes things. So we will redo some of the polls and surveys and ask you again for your feedback and for your information, because that is definitely something that we want to know.
I want to add to, the decision to take two bus networks to the public. It came from this place of wanting our engagement to be meaningful. We didn't want to say, well, here's what we think we should do. Here's the new bus network. Tell us if you like it or not. It was, well, here are two options and let's have a conversation about the trade-offs. And it was about, wanting to engage our customers in that conversation about and to be part of the planning of the bus network. And it just became very hard to communicate. And that was something that we learned. So we think that taking one single preferred network and being able to show, well, this is what it looks like today, and here's the proposal, that'll make it a lot easier for folks to understand. And there was a comment in here, I think about something that we have heard a lot about is that the website you had to be able to you had to have a laptop or a computer to read the story maps. And so that's something that we'll address in that next phase too, seeing how we can make those materials more mobile friendly, because a lot of people do need, we do need that.
Yeah, so we heard that a lot. Yeah, but I also say, it is a large service area. There's 125 routes. It will always be a little bit challenging to see on your phone, but fair enough. I think that comment was loud and clear.
Additionally, on the Center City call, actually on several of these calls, we talked a lot about L-shaped routes. Can you share any update on if those will be among the routes that might be added back in?
Yeah, so it is true the L-shaped routes got a lot of attention. I think it was network option one. We didn't have any so what the L-shaped routes are routes that start in northwest or northeast Philadelphia. They connect into Center City, and then they travel across Market or Walnut, and they give people access to the whole Center City, the whole corridor through Center City, whatever corridor it is. And in network option one, we cut out the bottom of the L. We just said, okay, once you connect to Market or Chestnut or Walnut, you have access to a lot of services that come very frequently. And so you could make a transfer. And we did get a lot of push. A lot of people, some people like that, but a lot of people didn't like that. So that is something that we are taking a look at.
All right. I think we have time for a couple more. Can you provide an example of successful microtransit implementations in other cities or counties? Curious to see how this works on a larger scale elsewhere. Harley, do you want to take this one?
Yeah. Oh, I do. So we are working in a parallel project looking at implementation for microtransit as we're planning for Bus Revolution. And so the foundation for that work is a peer review, and the peers that we've identified that we think are most like what we're trying to do at SEPTA are LA Metro, their Metro Micro program, and then CAP Metro, which is in the Austin area, and then the third agency is MATA, which the Memphis Area Transit Authority. So, something that SEPTA is committed to doing is operating microtransit in-house with our SEPTA bus operators. And so we're looking for a lot of microtransit services are operated. They're what we call a turnkey solution. So you just give it to a third party operator and they provide the vehicles and the operators and, the whole operation. And we don't want to do that. We want to operate it in-house, just like we operate our fixed route buses. And so we're looking for other agencies that do that. And they are agencies that have figured out how to bring the microtransit in-house. And so we're looking at that. And then the other similarity that we share with those agencies are that they, like LA or Cap Metro in Austin in particular, when they did their bus network redesign, they introduced microtransit to replace some poorly performing lower ridership fixed route bus routes. And so that was sort of the service model that we were looking at there.
All right, last question. We had a lot of questions. Thank you, everybody, for all your questions, and we'll go through all of these to read questions and comments. And anyway, I'll stop talking. That's the last question. I'll let Harley close it out. So this isn't specific. All right. So are there plans to install more furnishings at more bus stops, like shelters, particularly at transfers?
So I did want to touch on that because we hear this a lot in the community conversations, and people do ask, with an increase in transfers, if we'll have the street furniture. And it's a tricky one because SEPTA doesn't own the bus shelters or the bus stops there on the public right of way. So in the city of Philadelphia, the city has a contract with an advertising company, and they provide the shelters as part of that concession, that contract. And but we are working with the city, and we will have conversations with them about a certain portion of those shelters. The city has some say in where they go, and then the rest, it's the advertising company, sort of where they have the most visibility for their advertisements. And so we will be having those conversations with the city about about sort of strategic placement of shelters. And it's even trickier in the suburbs because you're not just working with one municipality. But it is something that's come up a lot. So I did want to make sure that we talk about that tonight and that we continue to have that conversation because it is important for people when we do increase the transfers that you have a comfortable place to transfer.
All right, we got 1 minute left. You want to share the last couple slides?
I think, just the helping out, getting involved. Yeah. So I just wanted to make another plug for the engagement that we're going to be doing in the fall, probably starting around October 1st, I think. And we are planning to do more in-person outreach. We, like we've been talking, we really want to hear from you. Your input and your help and your comments are really essential to us getting this right. We will continue to have some virtual meetings. If you are a representative from a community group or a faith-based organization or any kind of organization that you think you would like to hear from us directly, send us an email, let us know. We're happy to come to one of your meetings. And then if you see us on social media, definitely tag us. Tell your, I'm not a huge social media person, but I think, anything you can do to promote us on social media would be great, because we do really want to get the word out. We want to hear from a lot of folks. We want people to fill out surveys, come to open houses, participate in meetings, ask us questions, tell us what you think. And so with that, thank you again for coming tonight. The SEPTA Bus Revolution website is shown on this last slide. It has been updated recently, but we did take down a lot of information, although you can still see the network options on the website and take a look at those if you're interested. But yeah, thanks again. We really appreciated your time and attention tonight and all your comments.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.